Look at that, isn't it fancy? I thought I'd spice things up a bit. Welcome to lecture number 2. We're going to dig deeper into what we talked about in the last lecture, head noun, its subjects and verbs. So there's two things that I'm describing on this first slide here are head nouns, part of a subject, and auxiliary verbs, part of the verb, the big verb, let's think of it as. I will tell you right now, there are 2 parts to this lecture. YouTube only lets me upload things that are 15 minutes long, and you don't want to listen to me talk continuously for over 15 minutes. So this is a 2-part lecture once again. Okay, let's go. That's so nifty. Isn't that great? In the last lecture, we looked at subjects and verb phrases. We saw that every clause had to have a subject and a verb. We called it a verb. I'm expanding the terminology a bit and calling it a verb phrase. That's to distinguish it between some different kinds of things that we're going to see in a minute. A verb phrase suggests, I hope, that it can be a verb plus some other stuff as well. So, I mentioned this last lecture, but I'm going to repeat it. Subject and verb are what I'm calling functional labels. They tell you what a group of words do in a sentence. So the verb or the verb phrase tell you about the event. They give you all the information you need about the event or the state that's described in the sentence. The subject gives you all the information that you need about who or what is the sentence is about, the clause is about. Subjects and verbs are made up of words of different categories. Now, I'm not going to test you on these terms, functional labels versus category labels, but if you can spend some time thinking about them, I think they'll be really helpful. So, every word has a category. A noun, for instance, that's a category label. It tells you what type of word it is. So, whereas lots of words can potentially go into a subject or a verb phrase, category labels are one-to-one. So we'll see that in more detail. So remember that every clause has only one subject and one verb phrase, but there can be words of many different categories or many words of the same category within a clause. We'll see what I mean in just a minute. So what are categories? Categories are labels that tell a speaker or reader what kind of work a word can do. So you know category labels like noun, verb, adjective, adverb. In the sentence below, the last bullet point, let's have a look at how many nouns and how many verbs there are. So this is just looking at 2 categories, nouns and verbs. Got it? Okay, 4 nouns and 2 verbs, right? Dog, cat, cat, mice, that's our list of nouns. And chase are the verbs. So we're talking about instances of verbs here. So now we move on to how many subjects and how many verb phrases. There are 2 subjects, right? Because we have 2 clauses. Dogs chase cats is one clause. Cats chase mice is another clause. So 2 subjects and 2 verb phrases because we have 2 clauses. So I've mapped it out in that diagram. You can pause this movie and go through the mappings if you're confused. So based on what we've seen, subjects contain nouns, right? The subject of that first clause, dogs chase cats, the subject was dogs, dogs is a noun. The verb phrase was chase, and that chase is a verb. We know it's a verb because it's an event or an action. So the function label tells us what a word of a particular category is doing in a sentence. And if we look at that previous diagram here, we see that we map categories onto function words, functional labels. See? So, yeah. Okay. So all this is terribly interesting. I find it very interesting because I think it's a really important relationship to be clear about function labels, what a chunk of a sentence is doing for the sentence, and the labels that go on each individual word. Very important distinction at the guts, at the heart of everything that we're going to be doing. Okay, so I've intimated this before. Subjects and verb phrases can contain words of other categories. They're not just nouns, they're not just verbs. They must minimally have one noun or pronoun and one verb in them for the clause in which they occur to be grammatical. So let's first of all look at what else goes in a subject. A subject has a head noun plus some other stuff. So a subject, let's back up a bit. A subject contains at least one noun. And I'm going to call this the head noun because you may remember in the last lecture I talked about agreement and that the subject and the verb have to agree. So you can't, one word, the verb, can't agree with 12 words. It can only match up with one. So the verb looks for the head noun for agreement. This is explained in more detail in your textbook. And you can also ask me to explain it in different ways, or I'll write it if this is confusing. So what we can do to make it a bit easier is to look at this example. So the goose that laid the golden egg ran away. The head noun tells us, the addressee, that means the person being talked to or the person doing the reading. It tells us what kind of thing the whole subject is about. So in this sentence, the goose that laid the golden egg, the kind of thing that we're talking about is a goose. We're not talking about eggs, we're not talking about gold, we're talking about a goose. So if you can think about subjects, like what kind of thing is this subject, you'll find the head noun. So goose is the head noun. All the other stuff, all the other stuff is telling you specifically which goose we're talking about. Okay? So here's an exercise, and I'm going to stop the video after this exercise to see if you can pick out the head noun of each of these subject noun phrases. So we have 4.